We're bringing in Kyle Justice. Now, Kyle's background is shooting documentaries and TV shows for cable networks like ESPN, National Geographic, the Outdoor Channel, and Fox Sports, and his work has been Emmy nominated. And in 2010, he began shooting documentaries and TV series focused on science from a biblical worldview. So excited to have you with us. Good morning, Kyle.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me. It's probably a kind of cold day out there, but
it is a cold
conversation, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a cool conversation, too.
Yeah, fantastic. So this article that you and I have spoken about, it's just a 4-year-old girl finds a dinosaur footprint on a beach from 215 million years ago. We reported that story and just started thinking about it a little bit, and that sparked a conversation between the two of us. So first of all, just tell me about your background and how you really went from shooting these different types of shows with ESPN and everything and moving towards kind of taking a look at science from a biblical worldview.
Yeah, in high school, I went to church camp, and there was a scientist who came in and just presented this case for creation in the Bible and just got me really excited. But even back then, I was producing video, and I thought maybe one day, maybe I'll marry these two together and put something out. And I was excited when about 2010, as I said, we took a family road trip. And I have 8 kids, and my oldest was kind of theatrical, and we put him in front of the camera at some of the national parks, and it turned out really well, and that kind of led us to start producing kids shows on this topic of Bible and science, and it kind of perpetuated into now we have almost 40 documentaries and kids shows on this topic.
That is awesome. And did you say you had 8 kids?
Yeah. Yes, that wasn't a mistake. I didn't have 8 kids, yes.
Look, you had me at 8. That is awesome. So you're obviously a kid person, and you and your wife are together and love children and love teaching them. And kids love fossils. I worked at a school for a little while before working in radio, and I remember going on a fossil dig with I think it was like a 3rd grade class, and the excitement. I was excited with them that they had, but they were finding those little shell fossils, and they were just every time they found one, they were so excited, and I was excited. But children love discovery. They love adventure. And so this 4-year-old finding a dinosaur footprint in Wales, I mean, that must have been so dramatic for her. But there's so many different perspectives about the age of our Earth and how it got here.
There is. But there's only 2 main, I would call them, worldviews. One is that, the Bible, God created, if you use the genealogies and use different events like Abraham and Jesus, you kind of go back and it looks like the Bible really hints that the world isn't that old, that it was created about 6,000 years ago. But then you have naturalism, that things happen naturally by themselves, evolution, survival of the fittest, and our universe with the Big Bang, and it goes back over 14 billion years ago when this whole thing kind of started. So they're they're really in direct contrast to each other. Yeah. You really can't have them together, right? They're very different.
Right. And then as you're taking a look at that, so here's my thought, is that you're kind of one of the young Earth camp, that according to kind of biblical account, it's not quite that old. And is that kind of your perspective as you look at fossils?
Yeah, one of the things as a producer is I look at everything. I examine. I'm kind of a journalist, and I have to look at all the evidence. And the challenge with looking into the past is we call it forensic science. If a crime happens, you weren't there to see it, but the detectives, they go in and they try and piece together, where does the evidence lean? Where is it pointing towards? And as I've done a lot of research and talked to a lot of scientists, and then using the Bible as basically a history book to be able to showcase how did events happen and how long ago, I really feel that it leans towards that a lot of these things happened quite recently. One of probably the biggest things when we're talking about dinosaurs is the discovery recently of soft tissue, of blood cells and collagen and DNA that are still inside dinosaur bones. And we're able to see those things under microscopes. When we're told that dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago and lived almost about 300 million years ago, according to naturalism. But none of those things should exist inside dinosaur bones if they're that old. But if they're recent, we would find those things.
Now, you said there's these two camps, and of course we know the evolution camp, and we know the interpretation of scripture in the literal sense camp. But isn't there an intersection as well that some, I don't know, I can't remember the exact name of it, but there's an intersection of people who believe that God, of course, created the universe, but that there is some level of evolution in it too. Isn't that another camp, or am I wrong about that?
Well, if you consider evolution, there are two different types. One is called macroevolution, and that's where you have, forms changing from, a whale into land animals, cows and mammals and such, and these are major, major changes. And the challenge to that is that we don't see these transitionary forms over a long period of time. They say little mutations and genetic information should modify and change so that you have all the animals we see today over long periods of time. But if you look at, say, what we call microevolution, and that's where we see little changes within kinds of animals. For instance, when you look at what they've done with dogs, they've created everything from they've breeded them from poodles all the way to, Great Danes, but we can trace a lot of dogs back to like a wolf-type kind. And so that's microevolution. And what happens is they jump between, they say, look, evolution happens on this micro level, and then they equate it to a macro level, and the evidence just isn't there to support those in-between kinds. Now, they say long ages, you needed millions and billions of years for this to happen, but we should still see evidence of that in the fossil record, and quite frankly, it really doesn't exist.
Wow. That's a great explanation. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. You're hearing the voice of Kyle Justice, who's helping us kind of unpack these two different camps of, creationism versus evolution. Kyle, thanks again for joining us here this morning. Just a quick question for you about that article about the 4-year-old girl who found the dinosaur fossil. Just tell me a little bit about that. You've done some research into that article, and you have some really interesting discoveries.
Yeah, it is a cool discovery. We produced different shows. We produced one called Dino Hunter, and we've been to Texas, and we've seen the dinosaur footprints there on the Paluxy. So it's fun to read about how this 4-year-old girl was walking down the beach with her dad, and they looked at this loose sitting rock on the ocean, near the ocean, and all of a sudden the girl recognizes something different about it, and they walk up, and it turns out it's a footprint of a dinosaur that is been imprinted into the stone there on the beach. And, they went back to home, and they brought in some scientists to look at, some paleontologists. And one of the interesting things is they say it was very well preserved, and they think that it comes from a rock that is in a certain Triassic stone and limestone that's about 22 million years old, according to how naturalists would date the Earth. And so they took the rock back to a museum, and they're examining it, and they're kind of excited because they feel like they can study this footprint, and it gives them more information about dinosaurs and how they lived back then.
No, that's wonderful. And then, but taking a look from kind of a young Earth perspective, is kind of their assessment of this, is it accurate?
Well, it's interesting to kind of look more into this. Dinosaur footprints just aren't in Wales. They're actually found throughout the world, and they're all found in similar layers. It's kind of a global phenomenon in a sense, and you kind of wonder if it is maybe related to a global cause, meaning if it happened everywhere in similar layers, was it happening all the time in a short period of time when those layers were being laid down? what's interesting is a lot of these limestone layers are sedimentary layers. And we have sedimentary limestone layers. If you've been to the Grand Canyon, there's huge layers in the Grand Canyon that are limestone. And these layers just aren't in little areas. Some of these limestone layers that the dinosaur footprints are found in are well, they go from like Texas all the way to Oklahoma, and they stretch across over continents to even Israel, these same layers, and they seem to have been laid down all at the same time. The other thing, too, is on these footprints, if you go down to the river and you take your dog with you, they might put their footprints into the soft sand there or the soft mud. But over a short period of time, wind, rain, water, they'll erode and deform these footprints of your dog, and you won't hardly recognize them. And yet these footprints we find of dinosaurs are extremely well preserved. And so there's mechanisms there that would have to bring in more sediment to fill in those footprints, but not so chaotic that it would destroy the footprint when it came in. And so you have very interesting circumstances that would preserve these footprints. And if you have a footprint, like I said, over time, if you don't fill it in, it's just going to be destroyed. And so if we look back to the global flood and what was going on then, there were some amazing things going on with water going around the whole world, as the Bible says. And you have chaotic geologic things going on where you have, we can look at geology and see different faults that were coming up and down. So it just wasn't like, the global flood wasn't just like this, boom, all the water was there. It was going up and down and up and down, and these dinosaurs seemed to have been running in a straight path, like they're running from something, maybe a tsunami or some type of flood that was coming after them, and they're looking for higher ground. So there's a lot of these things we can look at and say, wait a minute, maybe it's not something that happened a long time ago, but more recently during the global flood.
Yeah, wonderful. That's an interesting way to kind of take a look at these types of discoveries, is especially from a biblical perspective. There is an event that is recorded that it's happened, so it makes logical sense as we're trying to figure out exactly how old this earth really is. Taking a look from a biblical perspective is a really good way to look at it. And I do have one more question for you, Kyle. This isn't really taught in schools, right? This type of perspective, a biblical perspective. And so as a parent or a student, how would somebody go about maybe even opening this dialogue, about a biblical perspective or a young earth context in the context of their school?
Well, I think everybody really loves dinosaurs, from big to small, and so this is a fun subject, number one. I think there's a lot of great resources out there that parents can go to understand a biblical worldview. There's sites like Institute for Creation Research and Answers in Genesis that have websites that have all the articles and so on. But, there's some fun things you can do with your kids. It's like, hey, let's create a research project, or, let's be scientists, or, let's be detectives, and let's really delve into this. And I think it can make it fun. I know with my kids, we've had just a blast, not just reading articles and books, but also going to some of the sites and looking at the evidence ourselves. So, field trip. Everyone loves a field trip. So, but I think you just need to also have a good understanding of what worldview is, that it's not just scientific evidences, but there's also worldview behind a lot of the things that are being presented. A lot of these different evidences are being presented as fact, and there's all these suggestions through these articles that you can read that says we think that, or it seems to suggest, and you need to pick up on these key words and say they don't really know. They're suggesting it, and so you that's a detective. You're looking at that type of thing. So, we could go a lot more into it, but those are some of the first things you'd want to approach, and just understand that there's a worldview out there, and the world wants you to not believe in the Bible, and so you need to really examine and have fun with it at the same time.
Perfect. Love it. Kyle, thank you so much for all of that information. Thank you, Kyle, for your time this morning.
You bet. Thank you.